Yeah, let's start just now, if everybody's okay with that. Okay, so everybody's here for the Agilyx Dynamic Forms webinar for Milestone 7 or Spring 2017. Yeah, let's just crack on. So let's just do the first part. So the agenda today is basically just going to be introduce myself, who I am, what I do, and then we'll go over the purpose of the webinar. I'll explain a little bit of the background for forms as a whole. Then we'll speak about dynamic forms, which is new to milestone 7. I'll show you a few case examples, a few demos of things I've set up for an example, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. I'm quite flexible as we're going. I'm quite happy to take questions as I'm kind of in the system or showing you things, so feel free. It may be worth muting your mic until we have a question. But yeah, the slides aren't going to really be long. It's going to be a short kind of screenshots. Then we'll actually be spending most of our time in the system to get hands on how we set these things up and what they look like. So, introduction, who am I? I'm Patrick Murray. I'm an implementation consultant with Agilyx UK, formerly Williams Woodward. My background is I've been working with Aggresso slash UBW for at least 10 years and been in a couple of different industries, so private, public, and things like that. As you may be able to tell, I'm Scottish, so if anybody's got any issues with my accent or I'm speaking too fast, please let me know and I'll repeat myself. I lean more on the technical side of UBW, but I do have a good understanding of the application as well. So I can be that nice bridge between finance and IT sometimes. So I have quite a unique skill set. I feel well that's where I found my niche. But yeah, if there's any more questions, if you have any questions about me or myself, please ask. Let me know. So yeah, hopefully that's enough information about me. So let's move on to the next part. So again, the purpose of this is to give you an overview of what forms are. Now this would be just an overview of where they came from, what they actually are, before we go into dynamic forms. Then we'll demonstrate a few examples of dynamic forms, how they can work within the system, and possibly where they're going to go in the future with Unit 4. The one thing I would say is that all the screens you'll see in the system, I will be using the web as much as I can. Obviously, that's where Unit 4 are pushing their application is going to be more web-based than desktop. Any screens I am in, I'll let you know if the equivalent screen is in desktop as well. For the most part, about 90% of them are in desktop, but there is one or two that you have to access via the web. Yeah, as I say, it might be worth you guys muting yourself. I don't want to mute everybody and leave it to the end for questions. So if you want to mute yourself, then kind of unmute when you have a question. So let's move on again. So we start off. What's forms? What are forms and how can we use them in the UBW? So forms are effectively user-defined tables that allow an organisation to store information that maybe Unit 4 didn't think of. So things like an example would be you have a posting attribute, for example, that says you have a mobile phone and that you post cost to a mobile phone. Well, you may want to have additional information linked to that mobile phone for that could be for reporting purposes or whatever. So you can have things called FlexField groups, and these FlexField groups can add in information like the resume of the person that has the phone, the phone number itself, or the company that owns the phone, additional things like that. So these would be classed as a FlexiField group, and that FlexiField group is effectively a collection of user-defined tables that you specify. This is the information I want to link to this attribute itself. Now the form part comes in when it's a nice front end for the FlexField groups. So the FlexField groups would be one or two tables, or even more it can be, and the form is a container, so it kind of displays those fields in a nicer looking screen. And again, it can be more dynamic. We'll get on to dynamic forms in a second. So yeah, the takeaway from this is, and I dare say some of the users just now will be using FlexiFields and maybe using forms, but FlexiFields are an attribute linked to a FlexField group. Then a FlexField group is linked to a form, which is a collection. And again, it's a display in which you can see from these screenshots here. So what are the purpose of forms? Well, forms are Unit4's kind of way of trying to replace paper forms. So ideally, we'd want to get like a paper form, like a payment request, a new supplier request into Aggresso, and this is just another way of kind of being able to do that, and maybe use the power of Aggresso's workflow to kind of send that for approval, rather than a paper form going around the office and things like that. Yeah, so it's a better way of using the approval structure within Aggresso, and a lot of users or a lot of customers will use the forms module rather than opening up the supplier master file. For example, you may have a request for a new supplier. Some people open up the supplier master file. That's fine. However, it uses up like supplier numbers and things like that. But if you use a form doesn't do that. It's its own entity. Hopefully, I'm describing that as well. You'll see it more as we get into the system. But yeah, forms are kind of just an electronic form of a paper. So we click the next one. So dynamic forms just takes us to the next level. Dynamic forms kind of changes data on the screen when a user interacts with it. It can default data from other sources or other locations from UBW. It can be used a wee bit more extensively in workflow, so it can create master files. So, for example, as we said earlier on there about the supplier, it can create a supplier record after the form has been approved, and that's all done in things called a service call, which we'll go into in a wee bit more detail later on. So the examples I've put together are kind of examples that I get asked more, quite a bit for. So it's usually a normal one would be a supplier request form, a payment form. That payment form could be for a supplier or a customer or whatever. And I've put together a basic project request form that kind of shows you the default values from an existing project. And hopefully that kind of covers most of the scenarios. I dare say you have your own examples where you'd like to use forms for or dynamic forms. But we can get into that as we're going on, and hopefully I can answer any questions. So as I say, there's going to be a questions and answer session at the end, but as I say, I'm happy to take any questions during the presentation. Yeah, and as I say, don't be shy. There's no such thing as a silly question. So yeah, let's jump into Aggresso, sorry, Unit4 Business World, and let's log in, and I'll take you through the steps. So again, you can see here I'm using the web interface. Just purely because, again, as I said before, Unit4 are pushing their application to be web-based stuff, so we may as well start showing the new functions in the web. So the first thing I'll show, and we'll just start from the bottom up. So we'll look at an attribute, what I've already created. So we look at attributes, and if I look at one I've done already, just before I go forward, can everybody see that screen okay? Is the resolution okay? Yeah, so maybe I'll zoom in a little bit as well. Put it a wee bit bigger. Hopefully that's everybody can see that. Yeah, so again, as I said before, an attribute is a FlexField needs to be linked to an attribute. In the case of this, I've created a user-defined attribute, which is basically just a payment request form. And we distinguish this as being different because we tell it it's to be used in forms. And again, it's a master file to be used in forms, and that just enables it. We've also enabled this one to be enabled in workflow, so we can create a workflow off the back of this attribute. So I'll leave these windows open in case we have to go back to them. So you've got your attribute. Again, it can be a user-defined one or it can be an existing one. Then we have to actually define how our table or how our information is going to be stored. So if I bring up a previous one, so we go to maybe the coding one is a good example. So this would be a payment request. This is the coding section of the actual form I'm going to show you. So this is you specifying to ABW how the table should look and whether it's an attribute within the system so it can validate that information, or if it's a date field or just a text field in general. So again, you've got the title. This is what the title is going to be for the user. Obviously, you've got multilingual titles if you're a multilingual organization. The column names are the internal columns that Agilyx assigns to it. Every FlexField has a prefix of _FX at the end of it. It just does that automatically. The data type is obviously just specifying the data types that you would need. You can see here we've got an attribute, parent, child, and I'll add a line. I'll go through some of these what they actually mean. So if I just test this, you can see that put in test. So if I click here and scroll down, so you've got, this is all the different data types. This is user-friendly data types for the user that's creating the FlexField. So we've got amounts, which is self-explanatory. It's the amount of money or whatever. The attribute is you're going to use an attribute that is actually within the Agilyx system, so cost center, work order, any attribute. Doesn't need to be a posting attribute or reporting attribute. It can be any attribute whatsoever. The checkbox is just a yes, no, checked, unchecked. The child relation is basically how Agilyx will kind of find it's like a form of code completion or code restriction. If an attribute is not linked to another attribute as a child or parent or whatever, it will try and limit it. So the example that would be if you do something similar in your chart of accounts where you say you can't use this account unless it's linked to a given cost center, for example. That's how you'd set that up. And again, it's the same with the child and the parent. And you can see my examples up here where I've got attribute, work order has a parent of project, and the project has a parent of cost center, and so on. So it's a form of a basic form of code completion, and we'll see that when we actually go into the actual screen itself. So you have a date, that's quite self-explanatory. That's just the date field. The float is going to be a number. It can be a decimal number. The integer is just a whole number. So, and again, when you select the integer, it can give you small, large. It's just different types of length of number. A link can be a link, so a hyperlink to a web page or something like that. Again, we've already spoke about the parent. The period is just the period within Agilyx. It's just a sign. You can use macros on these things. So you can say period, current period, and it pick up the system's current period. And the text one, again, self-explanatory, is just text. You tell it how long that text can be. So let's just maybe pick the text just now. And the display column, again, it basically tells you how should this information be displayed. Any case, uppercase, lowercase. Again, most of the time if it's text, it's going to be lowercase, any case. The field width, this is how wide or how the width of the actual field on the screen that the user sees. So in the case of this one, you can see it's 20 wide. However, the data that can be stored in it is 12. Again, the reason you may do that is that you may want to kind of have it nicely formatted on the screen, but still restrict how much information you can put in. And you'll see that in some of the supply requests where the field for the account code, for the bank account code, is maybe set to 20, but the actual data they can put in will be restricted to a certain length, and they can't overtype that. So it kind of helps a wee bit of data validation and kind of restricting the data that goes into your system a little. I'll scroll along a little bit and explain some more. So the mandatory field, or the mand, is basically just saying this field is mandatory. The user can't save the record unless this has some sort of data in it. The hidden field is, again, as it says, it's a value that you could have some sort of macro in recording something, like recording the user's name or a date or something like that, but you don't want the user to see it. So you click that as being hidden. The sum, this is for amount columns, so this will give you a sum at the bottom of that column. You can see that in a lot of browsers in Aggresso where you have a running total or you have a subtotal or something like that. That's just quite similar, it's just a sum at the bottom of the column. The read is read only, so it could be your default value in there, like a date. You want the user to see it, but you don't want them to change it. The val is a validate, so where you've used an attribute, for example, here, if I click on my work order and I come along, I've got the val column activated. So if I go to the validate button here, it basically gives me a list of all the work orders, but I've just restricted it to these work orders. Now again, you may not need to do that. I've just done it in this example to give you an example of a restriction. But if you have data control on your system, data control will do the same thing. It will restrict a user to their cost center project or whatever attribute you have data control on. The forms will inherit that from the system. You just have to tell it to apply data control to the specific form. So if I close that. The next one we've got there is default. So if I click the next one down and we have a look at the default, let's go to default value. And then here, I'm just basically, we're putting in default as that. However, let me change that. Change it to Agilyx UK. Yep, let's change that to that. So yeah, so this should just be a default that goes into the system. Again, it could be today's date, period, whatever. It doesn't need to be anything. So if I save that, okay that. Now let me delete that line out so we can save this again. So again, and this is the basis of forms in general. You define your table, what information wants to be in there. Is the data already stored in ABW? If it is, you can then validate it. And as I say, you build these tables up, then you link them to the form. So if you can imagine, we have maybe 4 or 5 different tables, and each table is classed as a section within the actual form itself. So it has its own headings and its own descriptions and stuff like that. Now you can see from here, the view type is set to table. There's also fields as well. Again, the table for this particular FlexField is more relevant because I want it to look like a kind of like a GL analysis looking section where they put in work orders, kind of like requisition GL analysis. But it can be fields, and I'll show you another one where it is set to fields. So if we go back up here and we clear this out, and I look for a new one. So PR, I look for, yeah, let's look at the header one. And you can see here, this one's set to fields because these are actually fields on the screen rather than a table view. And again, we'll kind of see that when we move into the screen. So once you've kind of defined your tables or your data that's to be stored within these FlexField tables, you have to link them to your attribute. So that's done with the link FlexField groups to attributes. And then here, you basically just go in and say, my attribute is, payment request form. There we go. So payment request form, and you just start clicking add, and you add all your FlexField groups in. So again, that's the name of the FlexField group that we've created. The description that it pulls through, you can change this, but more likely going to change the tab more than anything else. The user doesn't necessarily see this. The data table, so when you create the FlexField table, it actually creates a user-defined table within the system. And this is where you can find out the names of the actual tables. Again, this is really helpful if it comes to where you want to write a query or a view within the system. It tells you this is the tables that this data is going to lie in. The tab is, a form can have multiple tabs. So again, you can have tab 1, 2, 3 for different fields. In the case of this one, I've got an example of another tab being used, which I'll show you. But in this one, we're basically saying All these FlexiFields will be on the one tab. We don't need to worry about a user going to a second tab and a third tab, so that's fine. They'll all have the same name, so payment request form. Again, multilingual, you can do that if you have a multilingual system. This section is in the order in which they will display. Now, in the forms layout, which we'll go to, you can actually reorganize them. So this will mostly be for if you have, for example, FlexiFields on a cost center. Well, you can't apply in the desktop application, you can't have a layout applied to it, but the web one you can. So this is more for the desktop. This is the order in which they will apply in the desktop. As I say, in the web, you can overwrite this and put it in whatever format you want. The section name, sorry. This is just you tell it what each section is, and this comes in bold. And again, you'll see that once we go into the actual example itself. The mandatory field is basically saying the section has mandatory values in it, so that has to be populated. So, for example, in the notes, I don't believe I've made the notes mandatory. So if I click it to be mandatory, yeah, it tells me at the bottom here, you have to set something within this flexi field as being mandatory. If you don't, it can't make the section itself mandatory. So as I say, a field within that section has to be set to mandatory for UEW will kind of actually say the whole section has to be validated. So again, yeah, so you create these, set them up. There's also another thing in here, so it's connect to rules. So you can actually have certain rules in place where it can show a tab or not show a tab based on whatever parameter. So you could say if you had this on supplier master file, for example, well, FlexiFields anyway, if you have FlexiFields in a supplier master file, you can say show this FlexiField if the supplier group is foreign suppliers, and it could have a load of data in there that is more relevant to foreign suppliers, but you don't want that to be displayed all the time. You only want it to be displayed for certain supplier groups or things like that. As I say, I've seen one or two customers using it because it may have sensitive data in there. But again, yeah, for the most part, I've used it once or twice, but that's been it really. Yeah, so that's kind of real. Obviously, there's other things in here, titles that again you can give a different title or tab details. So this is just again, if you have users that are in different languages, you can come in and put in the German for payment request form, whatever that may be. So at this point, we've got an attribute, we've got a group of FlexiField group, and then we've linked the FlexiFields to the actual attribute themselves. So at that point, everything's fine, we've linked them, but we can't really do much with them unless we apply them to a form. Obviously, we can't do much for the user. We want to link them to a form. So if I kind of close this out and we'll go to what we're looking for. We'll look at a form. Where is it? Yeah, FlexField layout design. So again, like I said before, this is where you can put in additional comments and things like that may help the user when they're editing the form or creating a new form. So we're going to the payment request one. I can see up here, so the general information is just, this will be at the very top of the form, and it's just a general thing. So in the case of this one, the payment request, you're basically just saying the payment will be made at the end of the month when the payment run is done. And again, each section can have its own description as well. So you can have a nice wee description of each section. Now again, we've got the description of it. This is actually just like this here is the name that we'll be giving it. So that the heading description is quite similar to this. So we'll just basically say header details, payment amounts, and blah blah blah. This is the group that we've actually set up. This is how many fields it can have per row. So in the case of this one, it says 2, but we can go up to 6. Again, this is where it comes down to actually designing the forms and designing certain sections to kind of have a nice smooth feel. Again, it's a bit trial and error sometimes. You can tell it what the sections to be. It can be automatic. You can let UBW dynamically change the width of the column. Personally, I don't like that. I kind of like to have them all nice and clean and in a nice block. But again, you can change the layout. The placement always has to have one at the top, but then everything else is going to be below it. or to the right of it. So again, you can play about and get a feel for that. You'll notice as well on the right hand side we have the FlexField group definitions. So in here, it's obviously just picked this up from the FlexField, but the important thing is in here you can click and actually change it. By default, all the attributes are set to type ahead, but again, a personal preference. I like it being a drop down. You can still use type ahead on it, but it's still a drop down. Is just I think it's just a nicer looking just a nicer looking thing on the screen itself. Or again, you can change it to text box, and it is what it is. So the other thing I'd say as well, once you've designed it and saved it, you can have it as a draft mode, or you can make it active. If you once you saved it, you can actually click a preview, and the preview just gives you a rough estimate. It's like this is what it's going to look like in the actual screen itself. So you can see here, if you're designing a form, this is where I was saying about the different sections. You may want to say, well, I've added this in, but the header section looks too cluttered. I'll take some of the values out and put them in another section so it flows a little bit nicer. And again, this is where when I go to customers, it's mostly they'll have maybe an Excel or a Word document. They say that's our current form. We want to try replicating that in Aggresso, and you just try get to that look as much as you can. To be honest with you, it's not perfect, and it's sometimes you're not going to get it bang on, but you try to get as close as you can. But yeah, so again, once that's set up, the next thing you can do with everything else in Aggresso, you kind of have to create its menu for it. So again, I'll leave these screens up so we can nip back to them. So I'll click on the search so we can search for this. So if I go to administration, so this would be form administration. Again, I do apologise if I'm going over stuff that everybody kind of knows and things like that. It's just kind of to give you a background how this actually works. So I've got form administration. We would type in a pay request form and it would bring it up. Now, this screen itself, it has a menu in the desktop. However, it doesn't work because you need access to this create menu button. So you need to actually be in the web to do it. But every other screen up to now, all these attribute, FlexField grouping, linking, and the layout, all these are available in the desktop application, and they have been since forms got introduced, which was milestone three or above. So this is the only one. This is where the screen will start to have to be in the web for this thing. So you just create your attribute. You bring back your form, and the form is actually the form layout. You bring that back into the screen, and then you click create menu item. You give it a name. I'm not going to do that because I've already done this. You give it a name, and the name would be whatever you want it is. In case of this one, it'd be payment request form. Again, it can be whatever you want it to be. Once you save it, it will basically tell you. I want to cancel this. It will tell you that it's been saved and it's in the system. Then at that point, you have to do two things. So then we have to go in, and the first thing I'd normally do would be move the menu. It will, but by default, it will sit under the common area. It will come into the common forms. It will sit under here, but obviously you don't want users having access to common. It has a lot of the systems administration set up. So what we want it to be in, we want it to be in the actual section for it, which is forms. So you do that by, if we went up to and looked at the custom menu. Oh, custom, come on. Or even type in menu might be faster. Ah, right, you go, custom menu item. Again, this one's available on desktop as well. So if we went into PR, so the payment request form, again, I've moved it in here. However, it would have originally started in the common area under forms. It would have been sitting here. But what you do is you basically say this attribute or this form, I want it in here. So you click on the form and then you basically say place inside it, and that'll place it inside the actual forms folder structure, which means it's available to the users. So at that point, you've got your attributes, you've got your FlexField, you've done your layout, you've done the form administration, you've moved it into your new menu item. The next stage for that would be actually giving menu access to users. And again, it's a new menu item, so by default, nobody has access to it, even super users or system users. So if we go to menu access, oh, I want menu access, and once it loads up, come on, oh, it's thinking about it. Maybe I should have preloaded this. Yeah, there we go. So in here, we have forms and we have our forms here. So again, you can do this in desktop obviously, but in here we basically have to give access to the user for form, but then the actual menu item itself, I've just gave it to the system user just now. And if we expand it, obviously they'll need access to the sub tabs as well. Again, and this could be on a menu based, you can do this per menu. So again, I've just gave access to the system user and the system user as well. But again, that can be restricted by the menu-based access. So you may want some users to see a certain column and other users not to have that certain column. It's entirely up to you. So normally what I do or what I recommend, as well as giving the form access in here to actually create the new form, there's also down here in common, there's the form approvals. And obviously you have to give, like everything else in Aggresso, whether it's an invoice approval, you have to give approval access as well. And that would just be something similar where, just like up the top section, you basically just give it the menu access, and this kind of read, write, update, and delete and things like that. And again, it goes down to the actual tab level. So you've got that. So once you give menu access, refreshing the menu access should give the user that. One thing I would say as well, forms is not available in desktop, i.e. you can't create a form in the desktop, it all has to be web-based, which kind of makes sense, I suppose. So if I close this down, because we're getting a bit busy here. So yeah, so we've done all that stuff. So what we want to do is we actually want to look at the form and see what it looks like. So obviously we've been looking at the payment request form, so let's open that up. So again, we've got the payment request form, and you can see this. So this is the layout we've designed. Hopefully, it's pleasing to the eye. So we've got a couple of things I'll go through fast before we kind of move on. So the department is effectively just an attribute in the system called division. It could be anything you wanted, and it's just going to validate, and it gives a nice drop down menu for the user to kind of see and pick something. The contact is effectively an attribute, the user attribute, which was defaulted from when I logged in. We had a default macro in it that said get the user ID of the current logged in user. Let me just select something here. Obviously these are just text fields, text field as well. This is a date field, as we can see, and also a date field. Now you can see the wee red star. That's where we flagged it as being mandatory within the system. And again, then we get the payment method. So again, this is an amount column. Again, this is another attribute, and it's an attribute. However, I've restricted the currencies that the user can put in there based on the data validation. And the payment method is just text. Now I'll come back to this particular thing in a minute, because this is where dynamic forms really kicks in. So the rest is just text. Text. And now this is where the part I was saying earlier on, how you set if you have code completion in your system already. So if a user puts in a work order that completes back to the project and cost center and entity, when you create the form, it's not aware of them. That's where we had to specify where it's a child and parent type scenario. I'll show you coding here. So this is how you try work around it, but this is based on everything being a relation. Hopefully in most cases it is a relation, but if it's a tree or anything like that, it won't work. You won't be able to kind of do code completion on that. But if I'll show you an example. So again, I've restricted this to 3 particular work orders that I've set up. So the first one, if I pick this work order, you'll see straight away it says, oh, this work order is linked to this project, linked to this cost center, and it's linked to this entity. and you can see it's defaulted in the account code. The reason it's defaulted that account code is because it's basically saying this cost center only has access to this account code. So by default, it says, well, you've only got one, I'll populate it automatically for you. So that's what it does there. The tax code is just a drop-down value that I've specified. Now, if I add another line and I change it to something different, where I have work order 2, it still does the same thing when it does a code completion, but straight away I have access to 2 account codes. Because it doesn't know what one to pick, it sees it as a data validation issue, and it basically says you have to pick one. So again, a nice way of actually not forcing the users, but helping them actually populate stuff that needs to be populated. So again, if I select one here, and again, if I add another one in, it's the same idea. It's work order 3, and it kind of gives me access to 3 account codes rather than 2, and vice versa. So I could say pick that one, and I'm going to give it that. Oh, sorry. And that. Yeah, so again, and you have these little comments as well. This is the comments on the FlexField form layout. This is these sections here where you can put in a wee bit more narrative. So if you want to actually tell the user that they should populate something or give them some sort of information. Again, this is a certain limit. I think it's something like 255 characters or there or thereabouts. So hopefully you can get enough narrative in there to kind of help the user. So again, this is a form. This one is actually what I'd class as a dynamic form. So if I show you what, we can move on to what dynamic forms are, if everybody's happy with that, because obviously that's what we're here for. So if I close all this down, yeah, so we'll close it. Right, so what we'll do, we'll go through the forms quite quickly. So the supplier request form, I would see this as a standard run-of-the-mill form that actually it's not fancy, it doesn't do dynamic setups, or it doesn't get data from other parts of the system. It just effectively goes into the system and gets information. So this is a run-of-the-mill standard form. However, that may be what you need. All forms don't have to be dynamic. So this is just a supplier request form, a few mandatory fields, a few drop-downs and things like that. So again, standard field, this is just an example of what a field could look like. As I say, you try to make them as close to the original paper form as we can. So yeah, let's close that over. The payment request one, so this is where I would say it's dynamic, where so if I quickly nip through this, so if I click here and say let's just populate some stuff. So let's just say 100. And styling's fine. So the dynamic part comes in when this drop-down box is activated. So if I select check, for example, in this scenario, it shows a field, and that field is basically the check delivery method. How do you want the check to actually be sent? Do you want it to go back to the department, or do you want it to go to the actual person? So that'd be the user telling finance what to do with the check. However, if it's a banked payment, obviously you need more information, like bank accounts and sort codes. So in here, if we change this to backs and we tab out, you see a whole new section becomes available, and this section has got mandatory fields in there. Now, I'll show you another part. The other section I'm going to show you, this is called default and data. So if it's a payment to an existing supplier, for example, Agilyx, if I select Agilyx and I tab out of it, it's set up to go into the supplier master file from Agilyx and populate stuff. So it goes into the supplier master file, and then we've defined what information should be populated for the user. Again, this is just an example. Obviously, you may not want the sort code and things like that to be shown, but it's just a nice example showing how the impact of one field can reflect on bits of another. And again, that's the whole idea of the dynamic forms, changing the form layout, changing how it works in the system. Then again, with a normal code completion and stuff like that. So I'll just go in and populate some of the stuff in here. So we can just put this into a bit of workflow. Mandatory. Yeah, and I'll put up and say date. Yeah, I think everything looks fine there. Right, so what we'll do then is we'll submit it. Oh, one thing, you have to give the form an actual name. So this would be the user. This would be something the user can use to remind us of what the actual request was for. Now, if we submit it, so I've got auto numbering on, so it's generated a number for me, and that number will go into workflow and do whatever it has to do. So again, now that follows the standard workflow process. Now what I will do is, if we go in, and I'll show you the process definition for this quickly, because there's another interesting aspect to dynamic forms. So under forms, if I go to payment request, sorry, that shouldn't be the payment, it's the required request. This is the one I want to show. So say you have a supplier, you create a supplier, and I'll minimize this. It comes into workflow, goes to AP, they either approve or reject it. So when it says here create form, this is the new function. This is called a service call. And a service call is basically a call to the web service that generates the supplier after it's been approved. So that's set up, and we'll get to that wee part soon, where you can actually get the system to create the supplier with the next number and the sequence automatically, so AP don't have to do it. As long as AP have validated all the relevant information's there, but hopefully you get that information because you would have had certain fields are mandatory and things like that. But we'll come back to that in a section. But again, all normal workflow steps are available here, including the new, what is it? The new email. What is it? Yeah, the new email, yeah, email by approved by email. There you go. So you can obviously that's a new function in Milestone 6 and 7 as well, where people can just approve emails, and that kind of comes back into UBW and does what it needs to do. Yeah, so we'll go and have a look at a few other things. So again, we'll have a quick look at the project one. This will show a wee bit more of the dynamic forms. So somebody comes in, I want a test, and I want a test project. However, now they can go in and just create the project all the way through and say, yes, a work order, I need work orders, activities, and the team members. However, you can actually tell it to pick the data from an existing project, like we've done with the supplier. So and say, get me the information from project 2, it will go away, get me all that information, then the user can just complete what's necessary. And again, they could come in and change certain aspects of this anyway. Now, that's called defaulting data. Now, again, click on the orders, and we get the work order section, and they say, yeah, I need activities as well, and then go in and add activities, add work orders. Now, when they click on this team members, we won't see another section down here. It will actually give us a tab up here. So if we click team members, we get a new tab rather than a section. So if we click on that, just the same thing, you can go in, add, again, this is just a list of resnos, I think, yeah, list of resnos, and that's the division, that's just a list of departments, and again, the normal stuff if you needed that. Yeah, so that's just, and again, these things can go into workflow and get approvals and do such like. So I'll show you a quick of how the defaulting and the actual form layout works. So the first one is the dynamic form layout. So you specify the actual attribute, and you're basically saying here the rule is when something happens to this field, this is what I want you to do. So left, when an action happens, this is what to do. So I've basically said when this activity checkbox is clicked or is checked, I want you to show a certain section, and that section is the whole section of the table that we created for activities. Now again, it could be show a field, show a tab. And in the case of the project one, we've actually show a tab. So again, it's just going in there and saying, what do you want to see when an action happens? So by default, it will hide stuff, but it's when you click something, it will show it, or it will show a field, or show a section, or whatever. And you just go through that and set up all the stuff that you need it to be for that particular form or that particular attribute. The next thing I'd show you would be the, if I can find it, the defaulting data. So if I look in this one, let's say the supplier request form. and we say we want, so what you do here is, you, the first part is the form, and then the object is effectively in the Aggresso or Unit 4 business world, tell it wherever you get the data from. So in the case of this, I'm saying this is the supplier master file. So when I come in here, I say the supplier ID will be given from a certain column. So I'd say, oh, get the supplier ID from, I think there's a column in here, existing supplier. Maybe, come on. Oh, there's a, maybe. I'm not too sure why that's done that. But yeah, in theory, kind of no slows up here. So yeah, you put in there the form, you put in where I have to get the data, and then you just map. So you'd say, get the default data from the supplier. This would be a FlexField where the supplier ID exists, and then the company would just be, you can say, the the company that the client, the user is actually logged into. Then it's effectively going through and doing the mappings. So the currency from the supplier will go into the currency on the flexi field. Again, not too sure why this has kind of removed them, but I'll not delve down in that. But yeah, it's just a mapping exercise, and it just populates the data, which can be really useful when you're solving the project one. You don't want the user populating all the project information if it's based on an existing project. Yeah, I'll close. I'm not quite sure why it's done that. But the thing I'll get to now, and this is the bit, it's a more technical aspect. The service call is basically where in workflow the aggressor will, for example, in our case, it will create the supplier after it's been approved. So this is a wee bit more technical. So basically what happens is you set this up. There's two different types of web services. There's a SOAP and a REST. In the case of this one, I've just done it as a SOAP one. This is a standard that comes with Unit 4 Business World. The REST one is they're developing that more and more, and that possibly may be the future of where Unit 4 are going. So we tell it the attribute that this call mechanism should be applied to, and we tell it what sort of operation we want to do. So in here, if I kind of so this is all the available web services on my business server. And if I just say, like we had in there, supplier, then I can say get service description. This is all the available things that I can do on this web service. So I don't need to create the supplier. I could use the service to update a supplier, update an address, update a relation. So in the case of this, I've basically just said create a supplier from scratch. But again, the idea is that you could have a form that maybe updated the customer's email or the supplier's email without giving the users access to the actual supplier master file themselves, or stopping them from emailing AP to do it. It's entirely up to you. So once you've done that, that's the basis. Then it's to do with the element types. So this is the bit where it gets a wee bit more complicated for users that don't have awareness of the web services. This section here is the web service calls, and effectively what you do is you map your flexi fields to the web service calls, and you can see in here there's a few default values, but in the most case it's going to be, yeah, take the data from this field, default that, and take in the supplier group and put it into this relation group. And so possibly if somebody needs more information on it, they could kind of contact me. But it's effectively, it's a map. It's like before, it's a mapping exercise. There is some values that need to be in this web service for it to work properly, like the address and stuff like that. But you maybe not want the user to have to specify a sequence number and things like that. So you just default it in there for the user. So click the next page. And again, like before, we just do a mapping. This particular web service needs a user account, and I've just gave it a user account, the client is going to, and a password. So it needs that to actually be able to connect to Unit 4 Business World and create the supplier. I think at that point, again, I know I've kind of been speaking really fast and stuff like that. Hopefully that people have picked up on that. But at that point, that's effectively what dynamic forms are. You have a standard form. You can manipulate it on the fly based on what the user checks, or what value they select from a drop down box, then you can actually get the workflow to actually create the supplier. Or again, I'm using the supplier as an example. It can create within reason anything you want it to do. So it can create a cost center, a project, a work order. Uh, again, is possibly depends on how complex you want to get with it. I've not really done a lot of super complex stuff with it as of yet because it's still new to a lot of people. But I'm sure more people have come and asking to us when they want to do things like I want a workflow to be done for a work order that links it to a project and things like that. But yeah, but as I say, I'm happy to take any questions that may arise from what we've just seen there, and hopefully that's been a bit helpful on what actually dynamic forms are. So, have we got any questions from anybody? Nope, no questions. Was everybody able to understand me okay? Right. Well, as I say, let me just check this. So yeah, so if there's no questions, I'm quite happy to say, look, I think we're finished for today. I'd like to thank everybody for coming on the webinar. As I say, at the beginning of this slideshow, you had my email and stuff like that. So if there's anything that you didn't understand or there's something further that you didn't want to kind of speak in the webinar, please feel free to kind of email me and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, or I'll put you in touch with somebody that's more relevant. But yeah, it's like to say thank you for everybody coming on. The webinar has been getting recorded, so at some point it will be put online. I think they usually put them on YouTube or some other way. But we have a list of everybody that's been on the webinar, so we'll at least send you out an email saying here's the actual link to the video. Uh, Again, it might be more appropriate. You might not be able to, so you can replay it multiple times if you've not been able to understand my accent. But as I say, yeah, I'm happy if you email me. I'll kind of answer any questions and get back to you as soon as I can. But I think if there's no more questions, I'm happy for us to kind of finish up there if everybody's okay with that. Yep, let's no problem. Let's go with that then. Let's call that. Let's end it there, and we'll speak soon. Bye bye.